Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next edition of Conversation Aviation. My name is John Franklin, Head of Safety Promotion at EASA, and we've covered some really interesting topics over the last few weeks. We've done language proficiency. The last one we were talking about CPDLC, and it's great to now, we did some stuff at the start on culture and safety in general, but it's nice to really delve into some really kind of technical topics with a bit of meat to them, and really get into things that hopefully provide really practical ideas and thoughts on safety challenges that people that you out there in the audience are facing day to day in your organization. And today it's a kind of a really exciting topic, a bit like that. We're going to talk about all sorts of things around kind of basically maintenance check flights and other flights that organizations do that are kind of outside the normal day-to-day A to B kind of flying. And I'm really excited. I've got a great guest today, Donal Young. Donal, maybe you could start by introducing yourself, what you do, a bit about your background and how you're here doing this kind of work in aviation.
Sure, John. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to take part in your podcast. Big fan of the safety branch in the EASA. Big fan of what you do as well. So I haven't seen any of your playlists recently. I used to enjoy your
Do you know
music
what? I haven't.
playlist.
It's something we had a pause on that, and then maybe we definitely need to pick that up. That's a good one. In fact, maybe before we finish, you have to think of a track to add to start a new playlist before the end of the podcast.
That's going to be quite the challenge, but I'll rise up to that one. Yeah, look, my name is Donal Young. I'm accountable manager with a company based in Ireland called Technical Flight Solutions. We were formed in 2018 and we specialize in the area of maintenance check flights, demonstration flights, and delivery flights. We move aircraft all around the world. We do maintenance check flights on all sorts of aircraft in all sorts of um, offbeat locations, shall we say, from Tucson, Arizona to places in Spain. Amman would be a big place for where we do maintenance check flights. We've done a series of check flights recently in India and Hyderabad. So if it needs checked, we'll be there and we'll fly it.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this is that obviously most of the flying that any airline or operator will do is mostly, it's kind of the same kind of standard stuff. You might suddenly fly, get a charter to a new destination, or you might open a new route or get a new aircraft type. But for the most part, I mean, we talked about it in the preparation for this, you're kind of in a fairly standard, fairly similar bubble of operation, but on a very infrequent basis, you suddenly have to do a maintenance check flight or a delivery flight or something, out of the ordinary that takes you to a completely different location as well. You get an aircraft from an operator on the other side of the world, and there's lots of, kind of inherent risks in those different types of activity. I guess is a good place to start. Maybe is, what kind of risks do you see in those kinds of flights? Let's start with the maintenance check flights, for example, that you don't get in normal day-to-day operations.
John, that's an excellent question because our company was actually born out of risk. It was born out of risk analysis. Myself and my business partner, Captain Owen O'Sullivan, we set up Technical Flight Solutions in 2018, but it actually was in its infancy for several years before that. We were both working in Etihad and we were involved in the delivery program of 320s, 321s at the time. And we did the in-service aircraft test flight course in Etihad and through Airbus because Airbus were very aware of the dangers involved in flying outside of the normal commercial air transport realm. Like if we fly in a box in normal commercial transport, the box required for maintenance check flight
Mm,
is quite a bit bigger.
yeah,
But where the awareness and concern about this type of box came from was actually a crash in 2008, and it was a crash down in Perpignan in the south of France. Would actually it was an aircraft, a 320, that was
yeah,
involved in a maintenance check flight. Unfortunately, that aircraft crashed with the loss of 7 souls on board. And from there, EASA began to look and wonder, hold on a second, is there an area of flying here that we don't actually look at very closely? Is there an area of flying that we need to bring a little bit of safety to, standards to? So our company and our business was born out of that. What happened was 2012, EASA put forward a notice of proposed amendments looking for how do we regulate maintenance check
Mm,
flights? How do we look at flights that aren't quite on the books of a commercial air transport organization? And they went through a process: 212, 213, 214, customer response documentations, input from OEMs, input from airlines, input from organizations that were actually doing maintenance check flights at the time, or delivery flights or demonstration flights. And from that, the part MCF regulations were born.
mm. Yeah, and there's part of the part SPO regulations, just to so people
Yeah,
look for it. And actually, we've got an article. Some of you maybe have seen the article that Ewan and Donald wrote together for the last edition of Conversation Aviation, and we've got those. We said we weren't going to talk so much about the detail. We didn't want to talk about the
X.
detail of the rule, but the links to all of those regulations and the key points are in that article. And when we launch this podcast, we'll also publish the article separately, so anybody listening can immediately jump into that article and see all the references that you've really helpfully provided to kind of guide people through that process.
Yeah, and John, those regulations then help us establish our company and set up the structure that we needed. Because again, without getting into too much of the regs, in order to do a maintenance check flight, you either have to be an airline with trained crews specifically trained to do the maintenance check flights, and especially anything to do with abnormals or emergency backups or anything like that, or you need to give it to an organization that complies with the regulations, that has its principal place of business somewhere within the realm of EASA, that has a national authority doing audits on it and looking after it, but more importantly, has a safety management system and a safety reporting system embedded in the organization, so that when you look at what we do, we have nominated persons, we have annual training, we've got crew who just do this. They just do maintenance check
Yeah,
flights.
that's just,
flights.
yeah.
So
And actually, it's really interesting because we talk about, just jumping in there quickly, because we talk a lot about, when we talk about effective safety management, I think this is probably the best example I've ever got to discuss with anybody. Is we talk very much about the most important thing in your safety management system is the purpose, what you do in your organization. And I think, what you do every day in terms of, carrying out maintenance check flights and things like that, you know your safety management system and the way you operate day to day is entirely linked. And you said at the beginning about what you do is entirely based on managing risk of unusual situations, and your whole setup and your whole operation kind of enables you to do that every day. I think that's the big difference, isn't it?
no, no, that is, and it's a massive difference, because our crew are every crew is trained for the unexpected, but our crew brief the unexpected prior to every flight that
Mm.
we do, and then when they encounter the unexpected, they're trained to deal with that unexpected, because that's what happens. That's our normality, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have the safety management system to be able to investigate that unexpected and deal with it. And historically, what happened in the realm of EASA and actually throughout the world was you would get two individuals who maybe had done one of these flights before, or several of these flights before. They'd jump into the airplane and off they'd go, and that doesn't supply the industry with the safety structure that it actually needs to be safe and compliant with the regulations. So we're actually delighted that the EASA have actually been at the forefront of this. So EASA are pushing compliance with the Part SPO MCF regulations. They're looking to make sure that operators are safe and structured according to the regs and are compliant with the regs. They're looking to see that people are actually safely doing these flights, because everybody wants to avoid an accident that happened in Perpignan in 2008.
And I think that's such an important part of this process, isn't it? Is that the industry learned the hard way with the Perpignan accident, and sadly the loss of those 7 lives, and I think that's the thing ultimately that drives this part of the regulations, and just making sure that something like that doesn't happen again. And I think also then from a public perception perspective, if there's an accident, people don't understand the context of how accidents happen, what type of flights. If there's an A320 accident or a 737 accident or whatever aircraft type, that's all the public know is the accident. Any loss of life is tragic, whether it's lots of people or less people, they're all things we're trying to avoid. So, as you say, having this particular regulation, having, being just having more awareness, I think that's one of the main purposes of this podcast, really, isn't it? It's that, as you obviously work with lots of different airlines across the world, particularly in Europe. And what are some of the common, when you go to, I think particularly for small airlines who don't don't have their own people that do this, it doesn't happen very often. Are there some common kind of pitfalls or challenges that you see, particularly smaller operators perhaps facing in these types of flights when you get involved, or even before you get involved in them, trying to figure out how they move an aircraft or deal with a particular situation?
Yeah, it requires a little bit of out of the box thinking, and that's where we come in because this is the area that we live in. We live in out of the box thinking. So a lot of the people that we work with would be the leasing community, and especially with aircraft on lease transitions, going from
Mm,
airline A to airline B, on the ground for maybe 2 months, 3 months, going through an extensive maintenance program, a redelivery program, and then we're the people that will step in and actually do that check flight for either the previous customer handing over the aircraft or the new customer taking on the aircraft. And where it benefits the airlines is they can see our compliance and our training and our experience, and they know they're giving the aircraft into a safe pair of hands. Um, where it benefits the leasing companies, it helps solve that whole grey area about who's responsible. We had an occurrence there during the summertime where we actually had a rapid depressurization event on a 737.
mm.
um, Landed, everything was safe, everything was okay. And then this is where we stepped up a gear. The leasing company were concerned, and it was, oh my God, what happens next? Like,
Yes, I
who,
can imagine
who
there's a million things go through their head.
yeah, who do we talk to? My God, that was our 7-3 that came hurtling out of the sky at 6,000 feet
Mm,
per minute. And so our safety management system kicked in. We contacted the Air Accident Investigation Unit of the IAA.
mm,
We filed the safety reports. We debriefed the pilots. And then we started then the process of reporting through the ECARS reporting system of EASA to make sure that the regulatory authority had a copy of the safety
mm.
events so
Yeah.
that they were able to come back to us and so on. But it was great for the leasing company because they had never seen this in action before, and they'd heard about us and they knew about us and our safety system. But when it actually worked, they were going, so we don't have to do anything? We said, no, that's our responsibility. So we don't have to worry about the aviation authority coming knocking on our door. No, that's our responsibility. And they were delighted. Now, that's great for us because like we're their favorite at the moment,
Yeah,
Sean.
exactly. Yeah, I can imagine you score a lot of brownie points in that situation.
We're going to get every delivery and maintenance check flight that they have for the next 10 years because they saw what we do in action.
Yeah,
They were delighted with it.
and I think talking about situations like that, I think that's another great example of where, you know, handling maintenance check flights and things like this, handover flights, etc., out of the ordinary, potentially emergencies are going to happen much more often than you're likely to get in day-to-day operations, just by virtue of the nature of the type of flights they are. I think this is where particularly having targeted training specifically around like you said about being around the edges is you change considerably your training program from a traditional MCC, all of that kind of stuff, to
Yeah,
meet the specific flights that you're doing. Again, part of this integrated management system and making sure it's appropriate for the operation.
yeah, that's it in a nutshell, John. We have a core of about 65, 70 pilots that work with us all the time. And we do recurrent training with the guys every year. We start a recurrent training program now at the end of October. So everybody will do ground school. We'll all talk about threat and error management. We'll talk about the best principles of CRM. We'll bring in evidence-based training, all the what we do
Mm,
in the normal world. But then we take it up another gear. So when we're in the simulator doing our OPC events, LPC events, we'll do what's required, but we do it even to the next level. So if we're
uh,
doing a UPRT event, shall we say, we'll actually go and practice a maneuver that we would do on a maintenance check flight, like an angle of attack check at 39,000 feet. But then what we do is what can go wrong? You can have spoiler extension on one side. It can lead to a wing drop. It can lead to a UPRT. So then we'll throw in the UPRT at that stage and then say, okay, guys, how do we recover? So, like I said earlier on, we're out here. where your normal training would be here. And that means that we know our guys are equipped and resilient when they go and do a job, that the first thing that they're thinking about is threat and expecting it to go wrong rather than reacting
Yeah,
to it going wrong.
yeah, and I guess yeah, it's just that preparedness, isn't it? And we talk
Yeah,
about it. It doesn't matter whether it's commercial fixed wing aviation. We've just been doing some things on IMC, unintended IMC for rotorcraft, similarly, and also when we talk to GA pilots, it's that what are you going to do, and then how can you be as prepared as possible for that? And I think this is where, particularly for a normal operator to start stepping outside these boundaries into these edges of the operation without, just, well, we've got an aircraft, we'll go and pick up that aircraft from there without thinking about anything different, potentially has the opportunity, like possibility to be quite dangerous.
yeah, yeah. No, that possibility is always there because if you're taking an aircraft out of a
Mm.
maintenance facility, and we've seen it over COVID, if the
Yeah,
aircraft
yeah.
is on the ground for 2 years, 3 years, you've indicated airspeed issues, you've got navigation database issues, pressurization issues on ATRs. There was issues with window screens shattering. There are a lot of various issues that result from aircraft being in storage for so long. But
Mm.
even on a lease transition, those issues are still there. Like you're not quite sure where this aircraft has come from, where it's going to. You're checking things in the aircraft that are slightly outside the norm of a parameter of a normal flight. So that's why we train and prepare all our crew for these eventualities. And then, John, that's why we have a maintenance check flight operations manual as well, which is specific to maintenance check flight operators
Yeah,
such
yeah.
as ourselves, which gives the crew a structured way to brief, to anticipate, to look at the weather, look at NOTAMs, be really prepared for that flight when they go out and do it.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've been involved in as an engineer in the Air Force, supporting maintenance check flights particularly. And I know, there is, when you're doing a maintenance check flight in a particular piece of airspace, that's where really understanding what the weather's going to mean for that flight is completely different than just flying from A to B. And it's almost, like it's like an A plus game, isn't it? That flight crew have to be able to do this. And I think this is where, having a really good understanding of what the maintenance check flights and all these flights, what the rules require you to say, I think or to require you to do. I think this is one thing where, particularly the rules that we have, a lot of them, are written in perhaps more recent blood, shall we say, than in other areas of the rules that have
Yeah,
evolved over many years. So, these are really things that can bite people on the backside almost
yeah,
if we don't do them.
they are. And actually, the OEMs are now taking this very seriously as well.
Mm,
Airbus, in particular, provide a huge amount of guidance to people who are going to conduct a maintenance check flight
yeah.
on one of their aircraft. And then that leads us then to the type of people who work for us as well. Like, I suppose you could look at us and say, there are a bunch of crusty old skippers there. And, and a lot of our guys would be 10,000 hours, 12,000 hours, 15,000 hours of experience. We have a number of former test pilots from one of the large manufacturers who work with us.
Mm,
We've got a number of ground school instructors who would design our training program specifically for this area of operation. And we look at people with a lot of experience. And then anybody who enters our organization will have had done maintenance check flights before. That's part of the regulations anyway. But they'll go through our
yeah, a
training
certain level of
program
experience.
and they'll go through an element of line training with us as well. So if I'm flying with you tomorrow and you've never done a maintenance check flight with us before, well, I'll make sure that you'll fly with one of the more experienced guys that we have as well, so that we know the standard of everybody out there. We know we're all of the required standard, and then that way we know that we're giving the product that the leasing companies and the airlines actually require. So they know that they're getting a really high standard of person going to do this check. They're familiar with the check. It's not something you've just done once or twice in your life.
Yeah,
It's something that you do nearly every month. And we see the surprise in people's faces when we say, no, this is what we do. We're not
mm,
airline pilots just doing this as an extra. This is our career. Like we do maintenance check flights and we do delivery flights and we do demonstration flights all over the world. And you end up getting some really good conversations with people who go, "Oh my God, I didn't even think something like that existed." And then you sort of let them know, well,
yeah,
we moved we moved 101 airplanes last year, and they're going, "What? You moved 101 airplanes?" Go, yeah. and we'd hope to move more this year.
And I think even that number's really interesting because that's 101. And you add into that how many times aircraft are being moved around for one organization to the other, where we're taking an aircraft, doing something perhaps out of the ordinary with it. Sometimes they might come from, you know, organizations that have had financial difficulties, or from parts of the world where all sorts of, challenging weather conditions and et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of even as our wider industry, not, and then you add in the potential loss of life in scenarios like that, it's a really important function that the industry needs, and that needs to be managed so well to keep safe, and particularly, at a point where the industry is generally has this really fantastic level of safety. A fatal accident with a large commercial aircraft, with passengers or not, is such a rare event that, the fact that all these things take place so almost seamlessly and perfectly shows the value of, thinking about this properly and continuing to make sure that happens. In fact, somebody described me, somebody I know who does these kinds of flights a lot, described them as, it's not like you pass your driving test and then just go and then start driving around the middle of London or Dublin or Cologne or a big city with an ambulance or a fire engine trying to save people's lives. It's that kind of similar level of, it takes training, it takes expertise, it takes a lot more planning and thinking. And I think, just raising awareness of these aren't just another flight you go and do as an organization. It's probably the biggest thing in
It,
all of this. It's
it's
doing them safely.
it's the biggest thing, John, and I think that's the thing that we've been working hardest at from the commercial point of view over the last 3 years, is
Mm.
raising awareness within the leasing community that actually in Europe in the asset there are the regulations to comply with, but then even more importantly, raising the awareness of the benefits of using an organization such as ourselves can bring to moving aircraft.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that
Increased
makes.
safety, commercial benefits, knowing that your insurance is actually valid because you're using trained and compliant personnel. And then even more so now we see these days that people want to hear the sustainability story. Like
Yeah,
we find that when you're using people who do this on a regular basis, you're not flipping through the book to see what's the next bit of the check that you're doing. So we don't rush through checks. Nobody can rush through a check, but we would do a standard part 2/part 3 Airbus maintenance check flight in about 2.5 to 3 hours. And we've heard of maybe people without the same level of training taking up to 5 hours to do the same check. So when you look at that, even from a fuel point of
yeah,
view,
and
carbon
just at
point
a
of view,
really basic level. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really interesting.
there's a good saving there. And
Yeah,
then
that's interesting.
we see as well when we go to, we would spend a lot of time on Ostrava. We know the people in Ostrava in the Czech Republic very well.
Mm.
And there's one particular leasing company there has been involved in a large project for the last 2 years. And they see us walking in the door, and you can see them breathing a sigh of relief. Ah,
Yeah,
you guys.
yeah,
That's
I know
okay.
what I know these people. I trust them. I think that's one of the things about our industry, isn't it? A lot of
Yeah,
it's about trust and what do I know about these people I'm flying and working with. And
yeah,
yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of point as well. Is, building up the skills to do this safely, and that other, the people trust that in the system.
correct, correct. And it's great for us to see that response. It's great
Mm.
for us to
Yeah,
walk,
yeah, I
a
can
tech
imagine.
manager, and he's going, "Hey, how's it going? How are you? Yeah, great to see you back." And they know the standard we bring. We can work with them. They have all our documentation prepared. The briefing then is thorough. The customer will be across the table, and he's looking at a professional product, and he's going, "These
Mm.
guys know what they're doing." And then everybody's then comfortable when they go in the aircraft, and then they know the job is going to be done properly and safely.
Yeah, I think that's it. What a great way. Maybe it's a great point to finish. Maybe just if I don't know if you've had chance, you've been talking a lot and thinking a lot, but if you had to add a song, you've just started a new feature on these podcasts, I think, is if you added a song to our safety playlist, what's the first song we're going to add to the new playlist then from you?
REM, it's the end of the world as we know it.
Oh, that's a corker. What a brilliant one. Because if you screw this up, it will be the end of the world as you
Well,
know
actually, it's the end of the non-conformance world as we know it. We're moving into a new era of enhanced
it.
compliance with the regulations. Here we go.
Oh, there you go. You really thought that one through. Oh,
There's the
that's
pitch.
brilliant.
There's the pitch, John.
Hey, I'm impressed. It's the luck of the gab of the Irish, isn't it?
That's
That's
what
it.
it is. Kissing the Blarney Stone.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. It was a really great discussion, and yeah, it was great to open that box into a, perhaps particularly a world that a lot of people don't get into so often.
Absolutely, John. My pleasure. Anytime.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Take
Take care,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.